Not even halfway through, the 2020 decade has already had some really terrible films. But you know what's worse than just being outright bad? Being completely forgotten. Because there are plenty of movies that have come out in the past 5 years that even people who have been watching my channel for several years, and let me put it this way, I have reviewed all but one of these movies on this list that they just don't even know about. So today we're going to look over 10 movies from the 2020 decade so far that have already been forgotten. And we're going to go from newest release to oldest release. So starting off with a movie that came out just a couple of months ago is Descendants: The Rise of Red. This movie was a soulish cash grab that was already a sequel to a god-awful Disney trilogy that had no reason to exist and wasn't very well written in the first place. This sequel pulls out every tired trope you can think of, including time travel, and has no idea how time travel actually works, and saves the consequences that they make a big deal about for a sequel. Blow me. The song sucked, the acting was terrible, the characters were forgettable, and none of the original cast return except for 2 characters, both of whom show up for a combined total of maybe 5 minutes. Tops. And speaking of crappy Disney films, next is Wish. You know, the movie that was supposed to be the big celebration of 100 years of Disney ended up being one of the most forgettable movies they've ever made. And the worst part is that this one is also really infuriating and just all kinds of confusing, and yet it couldn't even elicit an angry reaction out of pretty much anybody. Pretty much everybody hated the film. Even Disney fans seemed to hate the film, but we all just collectively forgot about it basically the day after it came out. Hell, I had trouble remembering anything about the film when I was reviewing it, and that was within hours of seeing it. If you watch my review, I had trouble even remembering. I forgot even some of the worst aspects of the film, which tells you just how it left no impression on pretty much anybody. And rightfully flopped big time at the box office. Speaking of animated flops, next is Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken. Whenever this movie is brought up by some weird nutjobs who bitch about it for some reason, my review of it that just come out of nowhere, pretty much everybody's reaction to that when I post them on the community tab is, what is this movie? And that's kind of the right way to go about it. This was a giant flop at the box office because no one cared about it. Remember when Puss in Boots: The Last Wish came out in late 2022 and I said this could be the start of a new renaissance for DreamWorks? Well, I guess that was sliced to dice in pieces after the very next film because it was this one. Speaking of forgettable monsters, next is 65. A movie about Adam Driver fighting dinosaurs sounds awesome. But the movie only had about 5 minutes of Adam Driver fighting dinosaurs. I don't know how many times I've said this about this film, but I'm going to continue to say it probably any time this movie is ever brought up. I can't decide whether or not the marketing team deserves a raise or deserves to be fired, because it was technically false advertising, but they did a good enough job to make me think, you know what, maybe this movie could actually be pretty fun, and end up being one of the most boring films of 2023. Go figure. So the next one up is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yeah, there was one of these where it's the same title as the original film, but it's not a reboot. It's a sequel that ignores all the other sequels. It's Halloween 2018, but way worse. This is even worse than Halloween Kills, and maybe even worse than Halloween Ends. None of the characters were likable, even to the point where you're kind of rooting for Leatherface throughout the film. The kills aren't very interesting, the dialogue is cringy as hell, the movie's poorly shot. And a perfect summary of this film is the character from the original movie coming back to fight Leatherface, getting stabbed with a chainsaw, and literally thrown into a pile of garbage. I wish I was making that up. So, next one up is Moonfall. Yeah, you guys remember this Roland Emmerich disaster piece about the moon crashing into Earth? This sounds like a great idea, right? The moon may be coming off of its trajectory or its orbit and crashing into Earth sounds like a really cool premise. But one, it's not even actually the moon, it's some construction made by aliens that's explained really poorly. And two, it's a Roland Emmerich film, so you know it's definitely not going to be written well, with some really annoying characters, some of the most annoying I've seen in a while, and an all-around just forgettable story, which is odd because if this movie was good, or hell, even competent, this could have, or at least they could have made this movie batshit insane, and made it an incredibly memorable piece of crap. But the fact when your movie is the moon crashing into Earth, and it's forgotten within a few months, you failed. And I don't think Roland Emmerich should ever get work in Hollywood again. And speaking of illogical bullshit, next is Dear Evan Hansen. I've seen the stage play now, like I watched it a few months after the movie came out, and it was actually pretty good. Remember how I said that this movie would have worked better as a dark comedy? Well, that's kind of what the stage play was. The movie, however, tried to play it way too straight. Now, the soundtrack is still really good, because it's taken from a really good Broadway soundtrack, except for one of the new songs was good, the other one was, again, pretty forgettable. The acting is bad, and it's a vanity project for Ben Platt, which makes this movie even more infuriating, and nobody really seems to give a shit in the acting department. Everyone's just kind of half-assing their performances. I mean, there's only a couple of good actors in this. I mean, Ben Platt gave no shit, Amandla Stenberg can't act. I guess the best actor in this movie was the guy who played Connor. So, I guess there's that, but this, for a movie with as good of a soundtrack as this movie has, it should have been better. Let me put it that way. A musical like this should have been better. There are a couple things that it changed that did work in the movie's favor. The main problem with this movie, though, is that they played it way too straight, made the movie extremely boring, and once again, it was forgotten very, very quickly. Next up is Army of the Dead. Ooh, man. Zack Snyder films are usually not forgotten because they're steaming piles of shit that you want to forget but can't, like Batman v Superman or Zack Snyder's Justice League. But this film is the exception because there was nothing special about this movie at all. It's one of the most generic movies you can get. It's a heist film with zombies. That's it. I mean, a zombie movie in Vegas sounds like a great idea. Hell, the first 5 minutes of the film, ignoring the stupid bullshit in the first scene with the truck transport, zombies taking over Las Vegas would have been a much better film. But it's stuck in the first 5 minutes of the film, and they don't really use the bombastic colors and locations that Vegas has. It's all stuck in this shitty desert. And hell, you can make wastelands look good. I did a film face-off with this against Maze Runner: The Scorch Trials, which was also a desolate wasteland, but they made it look good. This one just looks bland and forgettable, and it helped that The Scorch Trials had good writing, good characters, and good action. This movie obviously had none of that, and it had some of the most unlikable characters we've gotten in the past few years. So, next up is The New Mutants. The final Fox X-Men film did not go out with a bang, but rather a wet fart. Because not only was this one of the first movies to come out in theaters after they were shut down, so it was pretty much doomed at the box office, even if the movie was good. There was nothing special about this whatsoever. The only drawing point was that it was an X-Men horror film, which kind of sounds interesting in concept, but they don't do enough with it, and the finale turns into just another generic action movie where they're fighting some tornado bear that looks like garbage, and none of the characters are that. They tried to define these characters through exposition instead of their actions, and none of them are very memorable despite getting some really damn good actors to play them, and overall, one of the worst X-Men films we've gotten. And for the final one, we're going to jump from Marvel to DC with Birds of Prey. I could have also maybe thrown Black Adam or Blue Beetle on here, but really, Birds of Prey was the most forgettable of them, because Black Adam is remembered as a soulless vanity project from The Rock, and Blue Beetle is remembered as the outlier of the last few movies of the DCEU that nobody gave a shit about. Birds of Prey, on the other hand, was supposed to be their big sequel to Suicide Squad because they thought Harley Quinn was some big box office draw for some reason. And that turned out to not be the case at all, as this movie also flopped at the box office and was just fucking awful. Ewan McGregor was at least somewhat interesting as Black Mask, but he was about the only interesting thing in this movie. All of the other Birds of Prey are forgettable. Hell, I couldn't even remember who one of them was when I reviewed the film. Yeah, I reviewed it months after the movie came out, but that's because I saw the movie on Redbox. So I basically reviewed it right after I saw it, and I couldn't even remember who the other Bird of Prey was, and it was Huntress. I don't remember the cop's name. I don't remember the kid's name, but it's like Cassandra, I think. And I remember they butchered her from the comics. Black Canary hardly ever uses her powers. Huntress, again, I had forgotten while I was reviewing. I couldn't remember who she was. And Harley Quinn is one of my least favorite DC characters. So all in all, just a movie that nobody remembers, and really no one cares enough to remember. So that's all I got. Leave it in the comments how many of these movies you remember. I assume the majority of the comments on this video is going to be, I've never even heard of this many movies. I'm assuming that's what at least 25% of the comments are going to be. Let me know if you thought any of these movies were any good. I know there are some people that thought movies like New Mutants was okay, but really what I want to know is how many of these you actually remember before I brought them up. How many of these did you still remember? Maybe you still remember Descendants because it only came out a few months ago and I reviewed it. Maybe you still remembered Wish because of how bad it was. Maybe you still remember New Mutants. Maybe you thought New Mutants was good. I don't know. Apparently there are people that liked that film. I really don't get it, but to each his own. But yeah, just let me know what you thought of all of these movies. And yeah, it's been quite a forgettable 5 years with these types of films coming out. So that's all I got, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.